Welcome to episode 1 of the Epoch podcast. I'm your host, Perry. If you're here live on Twitch chat, thank you so much for joining us. This will be going up on YouTube and Spotify as well. I need you to know, co-hosting our podcast is the man himself who needs no introduction.
Dread from Epic Builds.
I wanted the long, drawn-out hello. Ooh. Listen,
I am a little tired.
I love watching YouTube videos of content creators on my stream. I love putting them at double speed. I love putting them at half speed. Just to find those gems out there. Like who sounds good when you slow them down that much?
It's bullying. That's what I call it.
It's low-key bullying. But listen, no, it's community building. It's community building, Dread. So this is episode 1 of our inaugural podcast here. The intent of this podcast is to build up the community. We'll be talking about the last Epoch early access action RPG put out by 11th Hour Games. We'll be talking about game design decisions, talking about builds that we're playing in game, things going on in the community, highlighting things that we think need to be highlighted, and just having the kind of conversations that we want to have. One of my favorite content creators out there says that if you're going to make content, make the kind of content that you want to watch. And when I'm done streaming for the day, when I'm done making my own YouTube videos, Dread, I don't know about you, I want to watch content. I want to watch somebody else play this video game. I want to go be the Twitch chatter watching somebody else play some stuff. So that's why we're here. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, I've very many nights where I'm like working on stuff at like 3 a.m. I have no one to watch, so it would be nice.
What we really like to have is maybe some extra like European streamers, maybe some Great Britain, some England, maybe some Germany streamers out there. Someone who's in a different time zone than me, just so I can fill out those morning hours. Now that I have like a little baby w's screaming half the day.
I'm sure.
All right,
helps.
so we have a lot to talk about. We got a nice little introduction here, but we are at the very beginning. So we are about 1 week into the patch 085, which it didn't bring any new masteries, it didn't bring multiplayer, but it did bring a bunch of new content. So we have 2 new dungeons, and then we also have a revamp of the arena, including Arena of Champions. So Dread, I got to ask you first, what have you done with these things so far?
What have I done with these things? Well, the first few days was spent just chain running Arena of Champions because that was the only guaranteed way of getting keys because of the bugs. So I've done my fair share of Arena of Champions. Then when the keys started dropping again, I did my fair share of Soul Bastion as well. Of course, because like it's easy to get into the Soul Bastion because you just do it and you just clear the thing and you're good to go. It's not like Jurlo where you need a unique to do it beforehand, or like of course, the Arbor, where like you need gold to do it. So the Soul Bastion's really nice in that regard.
So we have keys dropping now, but before that, before the key drop was fixed, like keys weren't dropping from bosses the way that they were supposed to. So for the first couple of days of this patch, people were having a hard time actually getting into the dungeons because they just didn't have access to them. Maybe one person had one key, and then everyone funneled into that person's stream just to see what the content looked like, at least visually speaking. So, for me, I did 1 or 2 Arena of Champions at the very beginning. I pretty much focus my arena and on the weekend races. Like I don't really do arena outside of that. But all of a sudden, if you're doing the Arena of Champions, you get some extra rewards with it as well. I feel like it might be a good way of like during one of these weekend races, or like in a league start scenario, getting some early exalted items just in case you can like, get a nice helmet with some plus levels on it, get a nice weapon with some flat damage, something along those lines. What's your experience been in the Arena Champions?
So Arena of Champions, it's very, very cool. I like everything around it. It's a little easier than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be significantly harder, but this is also coming from the person that's been playing Bleed Shield Rush all this time, so I'm not really a good person to ask about the difficulty of said content. But from my opinion and everything I've seen, I think it's very close to where it should be. I really like the concept of having end game that is not end game, but like close to it, kind of like Path of Exile, where you have like multiple layers of endgame, where you go from like invitation farming to feared farming after a while after you get better gear and stuff. And Arena of Champions kind of like represents that, where it's like the thing you play before you do the actual end game. And of course that's, shown by the rewards that they drop. They're not the best rewards ever. They don't drop, obviously, but it's easier than doing like a T4 dungeon most of the time. My biggest problem is that's what I would want that content to be, is the content you farm to get into the new content. But the problem is they don't drop keys enough, in my opinion. uh Overall, in my experience, I barely got keys because, of course, you get the choice to get a key every single round, like every 4 rounds, right? And it was good. It just wasn't consistent enough. And I think that that's the niche that content could fill. Not just giving you like random exalteds. It could also just be the place you farm for keys. Like, for instance, you want to farm the Soulfire Bastion, but you don't have enough keys. Go do Arena of Champions, get a few rows of keys, and then go do Soulfire Bastion a little bit. Or, of course, you could always go into Monolith and kill some bosses. I think Arena of Champions could be that content. It's just right now it is not that content because obviously it doesn't drop enough keys to make that worthwhile. It's more of a kind of a side thing you can do currently. And one thing I really did not like about it is how it stopped the waves at 40 at tier 4. In my opinion, and I don't know about you, but if you're doing like T4 content, it should be some of the hardest content in the game, in my opinion, because that's the whole point. Like, I think T3, like T4, what it is right now for Arena of Champions should be T3. And then T4 should let you go to like higher waves and, of course, get more rewards. You get more, rows of keys, and you can make the fight much more difficult, but of course, much more rewarding. But of course, it'd be difficult, so you'd have to actually be playing a good build and do well in it as well, which I think is what should be the case. It's just right now it doesn't really fit that.
Oh, you know what's coming to mind for me right now? Have you played the game Hades? You spend any time?
Yeah,
in?
I've played Hades. I've
So there's a moment in Hades in the roguelike where you're walking through the underworld and you come to like, I forget their names, but it's like Theseus and the bull or something like that, and you're fighting both these champions at the same time. Can we have that? Can we have like maybe instead of like with tier 1, 2, 3, 4, like give me tier 5. Give me all 3 of these people at the same time. Give me the Forge Guard guy, the rogue. Oh yeah, I could be into that. Okay, maybe some guaranteed key drops there as well.
Well, they've actually talked about that. They've said that they've been wanting to add like Uber bosses and stuff like that, and I think that would be a very good way of adding that in, is having like a T5 of that. Because that's really all I'm asking, is for harder content for more rewards. Like, I like the Arena of Champions. I would like to be able to farm Arena of Champions and feel like as though I'm progressing my character in some way. And currently that's not the case. But as like an end game like situated player. But like when you're starting out, Arena of Champions is great because it just free exalteds. It helps you get keys for the other dungeons if you're trying to farm Soulfire Bastion. It does a lot of random stuff. It's like too random. Like, there's no quote unquote purpose.
Yeah, it reminds me kind of reminds me of conversations that we've had in the past where like wanting Arena to tie into the rest of the game more. And now we have Arena of Champions, which is cool, but it still doesn't quite tie into the rest of the game. So in the past we've said like, hey, if you can do, 300 waves in the arena, just set my corruption on all of my monoliths to 200. Just like bada bing, bada boom, right? It happens just like that. So having the Arena of Champions fill the niche of allowing you to make marked progress towards something else in the end game, like giving you keys, like you were just saying, that seems like a great niche for it to fill. We just need to, actually make it happen.
Yeah, I think part of the problem with that as well is I think the current content for the Arena of Champions isn't rewarding enough for how much time you put into it. Because 40 waves in the arena takes forever if you've ever tried it, even with like good builds. Like, of course, what Perry and I have been playing, we've been playing good builds, but it's like there is downtime in between waves and it does get tedious. And it's like, well, what's the point of doing this if at the end it's just going to poop out an arena key and like 2 exalteds, right?
It is kind of funny that arenas, when you're doing the Monolith of Fate, arenas, like, you'll have one wave spawn, and then before you're finished with that wave, the next wave is going to keep spawning as well. So if you stand still and you just deal no damage and run away from enemies, more and more enemies are going to spawn, and it's going to become like more of a pressured situation. But in the actual arena, that doesn't happen. You can be at wave 22, or like, I guess, 222, and you'll have 2 monsters alive, and if you slowly walk away from those 2 monsters, nothing else is going to spawn. They're just going to be like 2 monsters. Yeah, having more monsters spawn, having some more pressure, some more urgency to those situations would go a long way in making it feel like, you know, you're making progress and not just wasting your time.
Yeah, I think what they could do is just, right now they have a really good system in terms of like being able to choose rewards and mods per wave or per 10 waves. And I think all they would need to do is just reiterate that process and make it so that instead of, oh, you just get increased damage and health, instead be like, when like random modifiers, like, oh, at the end when the boss spawns, you add like an extra pack or 2 of rare monsters or something like that to add a little bit of spice to the boss fight. But it would add something like, but each rare would drop a random arena key or something like that. Something like that.
Put in a diamond matron. Sure.
Increase the difficulty, not just by turning up the percentage, but by adding different modifiers. Like, for instance, you could be like, oh, the last arena, it like there will be like balls that spawn, kind of like the Durla. I mean, yeah, like the Durla pools where they like spawn on top of you and make dot damage over time. Make something like that, like arena hazards as well. There's plenty of ways they could go about this to make it a little bit more difficult.
I like those ideas. It kind of reminds me of Lab from Path of Exile, where you can opt to make it harder, more difficult, to get like extra keys at the end. So like maybe you have extra obstacles during the final Azaro fight in PoE. It actually also reminds me of just the environment damage that happens during Gargenta's fight. It's like you have these cannons shooting at you, and then they lock on, and you have like half a second to walk away after they lock on. That'd be great. That would fit really well into that little arena place.
Kind of like a Colosseum, so kind of like Colosseum in ancient Rome. They're just like, oh yeah, we're just gonna add like 2 extra lions because why not? It's fun, right?
I'm into it. I'm into it. All right, so we've got so much to talk about. So we've got the Arena of Champions, which I haven't done too much, but I'm probably gonna start doing it during this weekend tournament that's about to go on right now. So how about we go to the next new dungeon that got implemented? So the first one was Julra. That was the Temporal Sanctum, which all of a sudden I know the name of it because it's no longer dungeon. It's Temporal Sanctum. So dungeon number 2, the new one that's introduced, is the Soulfire Bastion. And I guess if you haven't read the patch notes, if you haven't jumped in the game yet, this is the one where you can swap your shield back and forth between necrotic damage and fire damage, where you either take no fire damage or you take no necrotic damage. And the monsters, at least from my impression of running like 2 or 3 of these things, it seems like the monsters really deal a lot of damage if you have the wrong shield on. And I like that a lot. What's your impression been of that?
Yeah, they can definitely hit you very hard. I've noticed that as well. What I really like about the Soulfire Bastion overall is it's the only dungeon we have that you can go in and not have to have any prerequisites. Like, for instance, let's be real honest here. How often are you actually going into the Lightless Arbor to go spend all your gold? You're going to be waiting till you're at like 2 to 3 to 4 million gold, right? So it's like you have all these extra keys for Lightless Arbor that you're not going to use because no one actually wants to run the actual dungeon because it doesn't give any rewards. The reward is the vault. So since it requires gold to get in there, there's no point in running it all the time. And of course, same thing with the temporal dungeon. If you don't have the uniques or the LP to turn into unique like legendaries, then it's going to feel bad when you do it and be like, oh yeah, that's it. But the Temporal Sanctum is a little bit less worse in that regard. I think Lightless Arbor is the worst in that regard.
Well, and I think a big piece of this, but we can pause, is in the Temporal Sanctum with Julra, there are boss uniques that drop. Like if you want a Vessel of Strife, if you want to do like a health regeneration ward thing, you gotta go do that, and you gotta farm it over until you get the unique item. We don't have those unique items yet for the other two. Presumably, the unique items that are not yet added to the game, the ones like the chest piece that locks your health at your endurance threshold and can't go any higher, the quiver that doubles your shock chance, like those kinds of unique items, like we saw a glimpse of them, and then they were taken off of the third-party tools because they were deceiving people. But we know what those unique items are going to look like. Presumably, those are going to drop from the bosses, and then they'll become like another reason to farm these, even if you don't want to spend 2.5 million gold.
Yeah, I agree. I just think like I like the Soulfire Bastion because it just feels like the kind of content you can just walk in, do it, and then get it. Like for instance, whenever I see a Soulfire Bastion key, I'm like, oh cool, I'd go do a Soulfire Bastion. But then like when I drop like the Lightless Arbor, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna throw that in my stash, and it's gonna waste there until I eventually get enough gold to do it, right? And that's kind of like what I like about it specifically is that it's just the nature of just being able to do it when you want to and not have to have prerequisites.
As a
It's all
hardcore,
self-contained.
it's okay.
Go ahead.
So as a hardcore player who doesn't really do tier 4 content too often, because oftentimes there's not a reason for it, in my opinion. How is tier 4? I guess we'll stay with Soulfire Bastion right now. How is the tier 4 rewards for Soulfire Bastion felt? Do they feel noticeably better than like tier 2 or tier 3?
So the rewards, technically, if we're gonna be technical, aren't technically better. Like just what he offers. Like he'll offer exalteds with LP, with like forging potential. I think he'll offer more in general in T4, and I think you can get more like embers. But what I really like the difference between T1 to T4, because each tier are just as good as the other one. It's just the doors are different. The doors and their modifiers are different, right? The door modifiers. It's like my favorite part about the Soulfire Bastion is like instead of just having like, oh, enemies drop exalted whatever, it's more like, oh, instead whenever you're gambling in the Soulfire Bastion, whenever you're gambling there's there's a percentage chance that when you gamble an exalted item, there's a chance that like the forging potential rolls at the high value, right? Or there's a chance that the first unique that you gamble has LP on it, or stuff like that. That's how the rewards scale by having better doors. Like for instance, in tier 1, you can have like, oh, there's a chance that an exalted item will have a tier 1 sealed modifier on it. While T4 will have be like T5 sealed modifier. It is the only place in the game currently that you can find T5 sealed modifiers now. The Soulfire Bastion,
Which is
really
awesome.
cool.
Totally
Yeah.
awesome, by the way. I like that a lot.
And that won't matter now because, solo, whatever, everyone's on solo. But like when trade comes, and if it's actual trade, that will matter a lot because that's your ticket, your big ticket, like your money ticket is like getting an exalted item with like a T5 sealed modifier that's good, and then getting an exalted modifier that's also good, right?
And
like,
on the right base, and has,
Yeah.
some good modifiers on it. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Okay,
that's
okay.
like the problem right now with the Soulfire Bastion. I've seen a lot of people talk about, oh, I don't like the Soulfire Bastion because its rewards are bad. And it's partly because you need to be able to manipulate the doors. Like you need to choose the right modifiers for the doors, right? Because if you do it wrong, because what I like with the Soulfire Bastion is if you do it insanely wrong with the doors, choosing the wrong doors and whatever, and gambling the wrong way, you'll exit with nothing. But if you do it right, you'll end up having insane pieces of gear out of it. So there's a little bit of skill in that regard as well, which I really like.
Okay. So let's start transitioning over to the third dungeon in the game. So we talked about, like, Jewelra was the first one that was in the game previously. We have Soulfire Bastion, and we touched briefly on the Arena of Champions. So the other new piece of endgame content that was added is the Lightless Arbor, which has a pretty cool mechanic. You have this like little light that sits on your character. Kind of feels like Delve League from Path of Exile. It confuses me constantly because in Delve League, you take increased damage when you are in the darkness. But in Lightless Arbor, the monsters deal increased damage if they're in the dark. So like it's like slightly different, and it messes me up in the brain all the time. In any case, before we talk about like the mechanics of the boss and whatnot, I want to have this like nice smooth transition from the rewards of Soulfire Bastion into the rewards of the Lightless Arbor. Because the Lightless Arbor, we've seen people spend, 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 million gold trying to get like the biggest loot explosion possible. So for me, because I'm always comparing things like, okay, what happens at a tier 1 dungeon? What happens at a tier 3 or 4 dungeon? Is it worth doing tier 4? That's always on my mind as a hardcore player. When I've done the Lightless Arbor on like tier 2 or tier 3, the rewards seem absolutely insane for the amount of difficulty that I had to overcome in order to get there. Tier 4, if you're doing the Lightless Arbor tier 4, you can gamble a bunch of gold and you could get tier 7 modifiers on your gear. So the tier 7 modifiers on the Exalted gear are locked behind tier 4. But other than that, you can get some absolutely insane loot that just only has tier 6 by doing a tier 2 dungeon, which is like an incredibly low amount of risk for hardcore. I don't know. What's your experience been in Lightless Arbor?
I actually haven't done Lightless Arbor much. I did it once. I did like tier 4 once with the Shield Rush build. I put in 2 million gold and I got like 16 Glyphs of Despair. So far it's been pretty good for me. But like, yeah, my thing with Lightless Arbor, I think, is the keys don't need to drop that much. You don't end up doing the content enough for the keys to matter, if that makes sense. Like you like I would like the Lightless Arbor key to be rare, so that like when you're saving up, like you're just on the side, you're like saving up gold, you're like playing the game like normal, and then bam, a Lightless Arbor key shows up. Oh, I've been saving all this gold, time to go do it. Right now, if a Lightless Arbor key, shows up, it's just like, oh, I'll just throw it in my stash. I'll never use it anyways. And I think I don't like that. I don't know about you. I don't like that the Lightless Arbor is the dungeon that you just ignore until, oh, I have enough gold now, let's go do it. Now, I would like the doors. So the dungeon tiers, the 1 through 4, I haven't done it as much, but I know the dungeon doors have like special modifiers on them, like the first 4 tiers.
Do you mean the dungeon doors, or do you mean like when you're choosing your loot in the vault?
Oh no, I mean like the actual doors.
The doors themselves. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. I wish that like you could spend, like what Chris is saying, I wish you could spend extra keys instead of just gold. Like for instance, if I had like 5 keys, I could spend. So the way it would work is you can either spend, you know how like you start out with a chest and you can add more chests? Maybe make the value, like the amount, either gold to buy a chest for your room or like a key, so that we can use all these excess keys that are just laying around that no one will ever use, right? Because I think I don't like that they drop so much, but they're so useless because you only ever use one. Like what? How many hours? Like how many hours do you think it's gonna take in terms of endgame grinding to go open like a dungeon with like 2 million gold at least, right?
I mean, 2 million gold is like, for me, maybe like a week of play. Like,
yeah,
it's definitely less than a week of play, but maybe for like a person who plays a little bit less than me, but like it's still, if you have
but
one
if you
character,
compare that to Temporal Dungeon, though, Temporal Dungeon's fine because the Exalted drops, and of course her uniques are good. And of course, I think if they were to balance this without fixing the key drop rate and all that, they would have to make the Lightless Arbor uniques rare, but very, very powerful. Like that chest, it gives you like 40 regen per second and all that. I really do think that in combination with the relic is going to be very strong. But that's the problem though, is like the uniques are going to have to be very strong and very rare. And from what we've seen, like yeah, they're pretty strong, but they're not strong enough to like merit farming the dungeon so much to like get it right.
This is so we talked about like the rewards for Lightless Arbor. Can we talk about the boss of Lightless Arbor? It's a pretty notable boss, right? It's like I think it's the first thing in the game that you can't one shot it. It doesn't take damage. You need to spend at least
the first phase, anyways.
Yeah, exactly. So like you need to spend at least X amount of time, engaging with the boss mechanic, using the light to avoid stuff, to not take damage, to not die by accident when you're playing in hardcore. But like, you need to actually engage with it. You can't just have enough damage and kill the thing. So what's been your experience on the tier 4 boss? It's kind of spooky to me, honestly.
I like the mechanics of the T4 boss. The only thing that I do not like about the T4 boss is it has entangling roots. If you don't know, entangling roots is a fizz damage over time.
Super hard to mitigate.
Yep, it is one of the hardest things to mitigate in the entire game, because it is literally one of the hardest things to mitigate in the entire game. Because at least with the void pools from Jurla, at least you could run like a Ravenous Void, right? Like you could try, but like with fizz damage over time, I think the Lightless Arbor, if it's ever going to be farmed for some reason, like if the uniques are good or something, you're going to be gravitating towards builds like Judgment or regen builds that have a lot of sustain that don't require you to hit things. Because I realized when I was playing the Shield Rush build and a lot of other builds, it's like, oh yeah, I can't hit things to leech back because there's nothing to leech back. Right. And I'm dying because the entangling roots. And it's like, oh yeah, this sucks. I'm like, okay, this is gonna have to take a completely different build to do it. And thank God that like the content isn't really like required to play the game, because otherwise you'd have to play that kind of build for this kind of content. It's interesting.
It's definitely a rough place to be. Yeah,
I like it. I love it, and I think that the reward and the boss scales appropriately. Like I think I like the idea of the boss being like that. It's just like I said, it's everything around it in terms of the gold stuff. Like I think that the dungeon itself going up to the boss should be like, I don't know, some kind of gold farm. Not like an insane amount, right? Like it shouldn't be insane and like ridiculous. But I think you should be able to farm gold in the dungeon. And, like in the depths, like whenever you kill one of those amber elementals, you get like a big chunk of gold, stuff like that. So like
they're made out of amber. Amber is kind of like gold too, sure.
Yeah.
What that would do, it would make the Lightless Arbor like a bit more self-contained, which is not necessarily a good thing, but that is what it would do. So right now with Julra in the Temporal Sanctum, whenever she drops a unique item, she always drops a corresponding unique or exalted item as well. So we don't really have a good way of farming, I guess, before the Soulfire Bastion, one patch ago. We didn't really have a good way of farming exalted gloves. So if you wanted to farm exalted gloves, what you'd do is you would farm like tier 3? You'd farm tier 3 Julra, and then whenever she drops her gloves, she would drop you one pair of exalted gloves to go along with it. And that's how you would farm your exalted gloves. So it's kind of self-contained in that way. Yeah, having the Lightless Arbor, the 2 zones leading up to the boss, be a gold farm, I'm kind of into it. I think that's a fine idea.
It doesn't have to be like 1,000,000 gold every time. It could be literally like 50,000 gold every time, or in like T3, in like, I don't know, like, or like 100,000 gold in T4, something not crazy, right? And you have to like do the dungeon. You have to like use the modifiers on the doors to make it more difficult and stuff like that. I think that would be fine. And it would give it more of a purpose. Also, as well, it will also help you in general in filling out your stash tabs, because there would be a way of like getting more stash tabs. So it's like there are ways like, yeah, you could get a decent amount of gold, and that'd be fine. Obviously, you can't go overboard. Or like I said earlier, being able to use dungeon keys as well.
Yeah. Even if you don't want to kill the boss, because you can just farm gold in the first 2 zones. One of the things that I like so last Epoch's on this track where if you want to farm something, go do this. Like you could just farm generally and hope that something drops for you. But if you want to farm a unique item, you should go to this monolith and you should farm the monolith specific set unique glove node, and then you'll get Ravenous Void or something, or Salt the Wound. And if you want to farm exalted items, you should go to Temporal Sanctum, because exalted items drop all the time there. If you want to farm sealed items, go to Soulfire Bastion. If you want to farm X, Y, or Z, you go to this place, right? So I like the idea that, monoliths are kind of this generalist thing. And if you want unique items, maybe you go to the Soulfire Bastion. If you want gold, you could farm the Monolith of Fate, or you could farm, gold specifically in the Lightless Arbor. I think there's room for that in Last Epoch to have like a gold specific place to farm over there. I don't mind that. I don't mind that idea at all. I like it.
Yeah, or they could, make T4 Arena champions, maybe drop gold as rewards too. That would be cool. That would be fun.
Now you're just crazy talking.
Wait,
now
that
you're
makes
crazy
sense,
talking.
though. Wait, no, that makes sense. You're in a Coliseum and you win, you get a bunch of gold as your payment.
Well, who's gonna pay you? The Wengari? The goat people? They're gonna throw money at you?
What they had. No, what the champion had. It's their store, not yours, like their hoard. I don't know.
All right, so
I'm throwing stuff at the wall here.
No, I like it. I want to move on to the next topic, but I'm going to revisit something real quick. So we talked about, I guess I briefly mentioned in the Soulfire Bastion that when you don't have your fire shield up, the monsters in the Soulfire Bastion deal a ton of fire damage. And like, you can swap back and forth and you can literally take no damage. It's worth noting that the developers did say that the reason that Julra is so punishing in the Temporal Sanctum is, quote unquote, she is designed in such a way that players can literally take no damage by swapping back and forth. In reality, that's kind of rough because every time you swap back and forth, she chases you and you get void pools and it becomes kind of a cluster really, really quickly.
Oh,
but
they also did fix that bug too, where like you could swap over before she could put up
they said that's a bug, but it still hasn't been fixed, right?
Yeah. If someone's gonna be like, "Oh, actually, you could do this instead," I'm like,
"Thank you for pointing that out." So in the Soulfire Bastion, you could literally take no damage by swapping back and forth, but I was worried when they first told us about the mechanic that you would just leave it in, like maybe you leave it in the necrotic shield, so you take no necrotic damage, and then you just like wear prism wraps or like you wear prismatic gaze. These things that say like, less elemental damage taken, less elemental damage taken. I don't think that's a good idea. Those monsters hit so hard and they make you engage with the mechanic, which is great. It makes you play the game and the game is good. And I like that. The Lightless Arbor, it's the same way. When the monsters are in the darkness and then they deal extra damage when they're in the darkness, it sucks. They deal a ton of damage in the darkness and it makes you want to engage with the mechanic more.
I figured it out. Make it so that the more amber you end the floor with, you get gold. So like for instance, if you end the T4 one with like 100 amber or whatever, you get like 1,000, you get like 10,000 gold or whatever. It's proportionate to how much amber you keep, so that you're benefited for keeping your amber full for being at the end. And then you get like, I don't know, like 20,000 gold per run. I don't know. It's like something like that.
Sure, I don't mind that at all. One thing that's really goofy, and I feel like it's one of those moments that a new player needs to figure out. You're so used to like in Path of Exile, for example, you pick up your blue items and you vendor them for transmutation shards. You pick up your unique items and you vendor them for alchemy shards, and like that's kind of how you get started at the beginning of a league or an SSF or something. In Last Epoch, it is useless to vendor items. Here's my staff that vendors for 5 gold. Like, just toss it on the ground. It's not even worth your time.
Yeah,
it
isn't.
Yeah, having a new way to get gold, having a more specific way of getting gold, I don't mind that. We should say, technically, there was a buff this patch. Some people have anecdotal evidence that it is working. Some people are pushing much more corruption, and it is not working. And some people are much higher corruption is working. So technically, in patch 085 in Last Epoch, if you're pushing beyond 140 corruption, which is pretty early on in your empowered pushes, you will be getting more gold every time that you visit those gold nodes. So slightly less beforehand. At 140, you should be getting more. And then I've heard people who are like, 400 or 500 corruption, and they really feel like they're getting a lot of gold out of those gold nodes. So that's nice.
Before this patch, you were getting like 10k per gold node, and it did not care what corruption you were. As long as you were an empowered monolith, it did not care. Now I'm curious, I'm doing it right now, I'm going in game, and I'm going to go do one of those gold nodes, and we'll get back to that.
Sure. All right, you got it. Let's talk about something that I guess we kind of mentioned it a couple of times, and maybe if you're paying attention, like on the audio or here in Twitch chat, maybe you've heard us say this, and we kind of breezed past it, but I really want to call it out. Bleed Shield Rush is not often a combination of words that you just blow on by and you're like, yeah, obviously Bleed Shield Rush, and this is the build I'm playing. Bleed Shield Rush. Can we talk about Bleed Shield Rush for a second? So you and I know you're running an echo real quick, so I'm just gonna talk for a moment. You and I had some brainstorming going on. So I had someone pop into my Twitch chat. I do a thing where people can redeem channel points in order to encourage me to play a build. And somebody wanted me to play Frostbite Shield Rush, like a ward-based thing with Frostbite Shackles and ward retention. And it's like, okay, so we had to think about this. And I talked with a person in chat. And it's like, okay, well, does this have to be a Frostbite build? Could we do this as like Bleed or Ignite? Because those have a little bit more support when you're playing a Sentinel build. So we got the Morditis' Reach out of the build. We got the Frostbite Shackles out of the build. And we started thinking about, okay, so we have to sacrifice life to use Shield Rush with no cooldown. So if we're sacrificing life, we want a bunch of Leech. All the more multipliers in Shield Rush are generic more multipliers, the non-hit based, which means we can do an ailment. Maybe we can do like Bleed or something. Bleed gives us Valdier's Chalice.
Very poorly, by the way.
Valdier's Chalice has a ton of sustain built into it. So we started brainstorming, like, what would a Bleed Shield Rush character look like? And it turns out it slaps. It is so much fun to play.
I think
Go ahead.
In my 2 years of playing, it has to be one of the most fun builds I've ever played.
Yeah, like it does good damage. You know, it does 300,000 damage with some gear. If you want to meme it up, you can go higher than that. But like for reference, when you talk about ailment builds, you really want your ailment builds to be like 200k. If your ailment build, if your Bleed build, or your Ignite build is only hitting like 150k, that's a little bit underpowered. 200 is a nice sweet spot. Like more than 200 is like, well, I mean, that's awesome. It's a lot of damage. Poison obviously is not part of this conversation because poison damage on the dummy inflates itself. So poison, you want your numbers to be much higher. But for a non-stacking ailment like that, it's a good place to be. So 300k damage, Bleed, Shield Rush, whether you're using a shield or using a two-hander as a forge guard, it's extremely satisfying to play. It feels like a pinball wizard, just like jumping all over the place.
What Nick said is correct as well. Nick said Bleed Shield Rush is the fast track road to Carpal Tunnel, and I had to take a break from the build because of that.
It's a lot of clicking. Optimal play requires a lot of clicking. I think Bleed Shield Rush would be a crazy popular build if the mana refund mechanic worked every single time. It works most of the time, but if you're not careful, sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes you gotta like hold your mouse right on top of your character and click right there really fast in order to make it actually work. If the mana refund mechanic were flawless, I think that would be like one of the most popular builds in the game. It is crazy fun to play. It also strikes me as like one of those iconic builds, right? Like, even if you're not playing even if you're not playing Last Epoch, you probably know, like, oh, like, the Poison Lich build. Like, that's one of those iconic builds. Everyone knows what that looks like. Or you know what, EQ Werebear looks like. It's very visually impressive. Lots of explosions. You might know what Bow Mage looks like, because it's kind of this cast-on crit icicle thing, and it reminds you of Path of Exile, right? So, these iconic builds, like, you're going to know what these are, even if you don't play Last Epoch, because you've seen a video, you've seen somebody else playing it, you've heard somebody talking about it, and like Bleed Shield Rush is really close to being one of those iconic builds. It's hilarious.
I mean, I think you could go crit Shield Rush too and be just as fine, if not better in some situations.
I want to do it. I'm kind of into it. I don't know what kind of weapon I would use, but the fact that I died acting like an idiot in hardcore on my Bleed Shield Rush character. Honestly, I was playing a Forge Guard, and it's like, yeah, the Forge Guard version, like, it's fine, but I'd really rather play it as a Paladin. I'm into it. I would willingly do that again.
Wait, what? What'd you say? You mean this clip that I just posted in chat?
Would you stop talking about how much I died? I was trying to record a clip. I was like, we're gonna use what's it called? Rebuke, and we're gonna tank this damage, and then we're not gonna get hit and dead. It's like, oh, entangling roots. Oh,
mechanics happen. That's
physical damage over time. Oh, I'm standing in darkness. Oh, yeah. Shit.
I like the boss fight. I think it's a really good designed boss fight. Like other people don't like it, and I'm like, I think the only reason other people don't like it is because it's really dark in there. You can't see what's going on. Like you don't see the little wave of entangling roots kill you. You know.
Well, so fun fact: if you die to it, then the text shows up on the screen and says you died to entangling roots. So like, say, big brain play right there.
Hardcore friendly strategy over here.
Sure. I don't know. Like during the Lightless Arbor boss fight, are you supposed to put your light on the boss so that the boss deals less damage? Is that a thing?
No. So the way it works is you need to be in the light. If you're in the light, you will take less damage from the boss.
That's not what
Like,
it
if the
says
light is
though.
on
It
you.
says enemies that are highlighted deal less damage.
That was from my case. I was able to tank it pretty easily when you like actually have the light on you in T4. Yeah, you kind of just stand. Yeah, you kind of just do what the Lizard's saying.
You kind of just stand still. Okay, I'm gonna have to go jump back in there in softcore and make sure that I know like the solid way of doing this.
Like I said, the only problem I ever had with dealing with T4 is just the stupid entangling roots. Because like if you're playing the wrong build, though, it can actually kill you. Because if you're playing like a Titan Heart build or something, it's gonna kill you.
Like,
But
no
yeah, what
regen,
Lizard said,
just
there are
dead.
some blind spots.
Okay, so we're gonna have to do something like that. I'm going down my list of our conversation
Oh, let's
pieces
talk
here.
about Ravenous Void. That'll be fun.
Let's talk about Ravenous Void. I wanted to make sure that like, okay, so we got our week 1 podcast here. We've been playing with the new patch for about 7 days now, and we've had not drama per se, but we've had some things that have like, you know, got nerfed and then got unnerfed, or the key drop rate was kind of funky and then, you know, it got changed, or like this happened and then it got changed within like 2 or 3 days. So Ravenous Void is one of those things. You want to walk us through it?
So Ravenous Void used to just be one of, if not the best item in the game currently. It was our Mage Blood or our Headhunter. It was literally the best item in the game. And the devs didn't really like how it was being utilized because it's literally just slap it on and you get all that DR. But the problem is, it's supposed to be that chase item. It's supposed to be that strong, right? Now, when they nerfed it and they changed it, I think they still thought it would be like that. They thought that turning your Fizz to Void would still be strong. Like, they thought that the new Ravenous Voids would still be strong, like the second version, because now we have so many versions of it now. But obviously, after us looking at it, no, it was not very good at all. And I really like the way they went about this new version of it, where it just turns off your leech. I like that. I think that's a cool downside.
So the first Ravenous Void was 25% damage reduction. Just like it gave you a vitality, percent health, and 25% flat damage reduction across the board. It was like ludicrously strong item with like pretty much no downside to it. Technically, if you went under your endurance threshold, you'd have to back off for a couple seconds, but that's what it was. So for a couple days at the beginning of patch 085, there was like this big nerf, and the most contentious issue about this was that Ravenous Void is a supported unique item from Quiet for Me, same person who made Legacy of the Quiet Forest, and they hadn't communicated with Quiet. So Quiet's idea was like, hey, Ravenous Void should be this omega strong chase item in the game, and all of a sudden, without communicating to him, they just like changed it drastically. So it wasn't a useless item, it just had significantly fewer uses to it. Honestly, I want to tell you, I was kind of excited to use the nerfed Ravenous Void. It had like 75% fizz damage taken as void damage, and then like less void damage. It was kind of like void mitigation and fizz mitigation, except it just wasn't necrotic, fire, cold, everything else across the board, right? So my idea was to use it along with like an Ashen Crown for a ton of physical mitigation, because then you have fizz taking as fire, fizz taking as void. You could also use it with like Ravenous Void plus a Grimoire, because Grimoire would give you less physical damage taken, less void damage taken. So it kind of doubles down on making you tanky when you click your potion. I thought that was kind of cool. It's significantly more niche, but I don't know, this is kind of neat. I'd still use it. So after those couple days were up, I asked Quiet, and I see Quiet is in Twitch chat right now as well, so I hope he doesn't mind me telling the story on his behalf. But apparently Quiet reached out. There's some community members who wanted to make this known, And after Quiet was working with the developers, they reestablished Ravenous Void to what it is right now. So it doesn't have the same kind of, void physical mitigation, void taking this fizz. It used to be like 75 or 85, something like that, but now it's back to like 10% or so. So the current state of Ravenous Void is it's back to being just this generically very strong item. It has vitality, it has percent health, it's an insane pair of gloves, and then it has like 15% generic damage mitigation across the board.
Instead
so
of 25%,
it's not 25%.
the first version.
Yeah, so it's down to 15%. It's still an insane item, but I guess I don't really want to use it with a Grimoire. Don't really want to use it with an Ashen Crown. Not for any particular reason. I mean, I would, but it doesn't have that spicy synergy anymore. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see, like, they made this change without talking to the community member whose unique item this was. And then there was some community pushback and these things happen. So what I will say is I like that we still have this incredibly chase item in the game, because I like chase items too. I'm surprised that they made the change without talking to the community member whose item it was, but I like that it had a good resolution to it. I like that
they very quickly made it right as soon as it was a problem that was brought up to them. And that's actually something EHG has been very good at, is like whenever there is a problem brought up to them, sure, they might not always see the problem, but when the problem is brought up to them, they fix it. Like, for instance, Gaspar's Insight. We brought it up to them like, oh, fix next patch. Oh, like Erasing Strike is literally erasing Jurla's loot when she dies.
She no longer drops items.
Yeah, it was fixed next patch. Well, it was literally erasing the loot. But yeah, like, they've been very good on that regard in terms of communication and stuff. Like, when they do make a mistake, they are very quick to fix it when it is pointed out. And I think, in like what Quiet was saying, sometimes it is even better sometimes because the 30% when it doubles and stuff. And I think the downside of the gloves and the upside are much closer together to the point where it makes sense. I do understand why the old version was nerfed, because it was just OP for the sake of being OP. Yeah, it was literally just OP for the sake of it being OP. And it's like, don't get me wrong, that's a cool idea, but this, like, there needs to be some kind of balance in the game, and the new gloves very well mimic that ideology.
The new gloves, when you drop below your endurance threshold, the damage mitigation doubles for seconds, and then it turns on something called like Mimic Feast, and it disables your ability to leech health, which is awesome.
Now it can just be cleansed,
but you can just cleanse it. You just use a cleanse belt.
That's a different problem with the cleanse belt. The cleanse belt shouldn't exist, in my opinion.
It's like,
it invalidates all the other uses of cleanse in the game.
You're gonna have to do the very strange, like not programmed. So when you go on low health, chat, make sure that you use a potion. I know you weren't going to anyways, but now you should use a potion. It's very important, because you got to cleanse the stupid leeching.
We're talking about what we're talking about, Quiet, is we're talking about how, like, cleanse belt pretty much invalidates every other form of cleanse, like on Warcry, on Holy Aura, all of these ways. Like, for instance, if cleanse belt didn't exist, be like, oh, Ravenous Void, sometimes my leech will turn off and I need to cleanse it. Well, how about I play like a Primalist with Warcry with cleanse on it? Bam, you can use Ravenous Void on all Primalists like that.
Or maybe you can spec Smite in order to constantly heal you every time that it pops off.
Yeah,
I love playing like a Smite build that has some extra points available that can make Smite cleanse you. Because, like, constantly being cleansed feels so good. Like, you never worry about armor shred. Never worry about, like, being ailment immune is incredibly strong in the last Epoch.
And that's just a topic for another day, cleanse belt.
I've already got my list of topics backed up. Don't worry about it. So we can talk about one more thing, because this is Friday. We have the weekend race that Vision GL hosts, which I love talking about, because I just think he does such a good job hosting these weekend races. There are a couple things that are kind of standing out as exceptionally strong in this new patch. So my last topic for this podcast was standout builds that people should know about for 085. Like, what's the new stuff that people in the community are messing around with. So there's two things that I wrote down. Do you want to guess the first one? The
Swarm
second
Strike.
one is really obvious. Go ahead.
Swarm Strike, obviously.
Swarm Strike's one of them, but the other one that I wrote down was the Dragon Songbow.
Oh yeah.
So people using the Dragon Songbow. So the Dragon Songbow, it has this incredibly strong proc with 900% effectiveness of added damage, a better proc rate than the Icicle from the Reign of Winter bow. I think that the people who are using the Dragon Songbow in the Decoy Bomber Cinder Strike Blasting Agent build, I think those people are doing it right. I think that build is incredibly strong. But trying to build around the Dragon Song proc and having the proc be your primary source of damage, I think that's a mistake. I've heard a lot of people are underwhelmed about that.
Perry. I haven't even gotten that far because the game lags too much when I am proccing it.
That's because you're proccing it too much. Have you considered playing a worse? No, play a worse build. I think you'll have a better time.
I'm just not supposed to play it the right way, huh?
So the Dragon Song bow is like, it's one of the like new spicy things that people are working on. So the second thing, let's spend a couple minutes talking about this because it's the first thing that you rolled your eyes about, and I might be playing this build this weekend for the tournament. So the second build is Swarm Strike. Can you walk us through Swarm Strike real quick? What changed with this thing?
All right. So back in the day, Locust Swarm, the ability that is procced by Swarm Strike when you consume some locusts, it used to only give you 12 fizz, 12 poison flat, and then increased area per locust consumed. And it had a 4-second duration, and you could make it 8 seconds with the tree with a bunch of points, and Swarm Blade sucks with points because it's point starved, and of course extra 4 on Werebear. You could play it before, and as strong as it is now, you could have played it back in the day. What was added was now you get 12% increased duration per locust consumed, and I think that was a mistake. And I feel like as though I'm partly like at fault for this, because whenever I would talk about locusts, like the locusts themselves, I'd always talk about their duration being bad. And I think they misread that as the locust swarm's duration being bad. And now we have this monstrosity that has like a 15-second duration on a proc that does not require a weapon whatsoever to deal damage. And it is just one of the most disgusting things ever. I think Amarathi was doing the math. You're getting close to over like 400 plus flat just from your locusts alone.
I think it's like 800, but go ahead.
Or it's
I think it's a lot.
Absolutely disgusting. I played the very kosher version, the version you were probably supposed to play with this, but obviously, as the community likes to break things, we have all found the way to break it, and you just simply summon your locusts, you summon like with your totems, and then you smack them, and then you get like twice as many locusts, you get like 50 plus locusts, you consume them all, and then you have this gigantic AoE that deals damage over time, doesn't care about dodge, doesn't care about crit. It leeches back because for some reason it counts as a melee skill instead of a spell, which makes no sense whatsoever, but we'll ignore that for now. And it uses melee damage, leeches life. And it is just a better, like, it's like as if you have a bleeding heart without having a bleeding heart, because Primalist has melee leech percentage globally, not on hits, but globally on his tree. And then you combine that with the 20% plus on a two-hander you can get, 20% melee damage leeches life, because guess what? You don't need a good weapon, you just need something to leech on it, and you have close to like 40% damage leech from this gigantic AoE that has an insane amount of flat. Now, the point why it is built this way is all of this flat is supposed to make up for the fact that you do not have more damage multipliers in the Swarm Blade tree. It is the main reason why that's the case. The problem is, with that duration, it went a little bit overkill, because you can, since the duration scales with how many locusts you get, like for instance, if you consume 50 locusts, right, that's like close to 600% increased duration. So you go from 4-second duration to a 24-second duration, which is like ridiculous, obviously, right? Like you get to like spend the whole monolith with this gigantic AoE on you. And I think obviously it's going to get nerfed. I just don't know how. And I hope when they nerf it, they don't nerf the duration part, because I love the duration part. It's the damage part that's obviously the dumb part. Like being able to
some kind of
utilize
cap on how much duration or how much added damage or how much percent damage, or a cap somewhere would do a lot to rein this build in.
Well, I like the bleed one. The bleed one's cool because it requires you to like set up stuff. The bleed one where like you get increased damage per bleed you consume, but the locust one is the problem. It's just like you just get so much from each locust.
So in my experience, kind of messing around with this build the other day, seeing if I wanted to play this during a weekend tournament, it was about like 800 flat damage. It's like a 2,500% increased damage. And then the duration is like 45 seconds, maybe a minute, depending on what kind of cheese you're using in the build. And the AoE is basically the entire screen. You can swap into werebear form and then just rampage, get some extra movement speed running through the whole map. And all of those numbers that I just told you, that's without a weapon. You do not need a weapon on this build. And that's the part that really gets to me, right? Like, I want builds that require you to gear. This is an action RPG. We're farming loot. We're getting exalted items. We're getting legendary items. We should be excited to do this. Why do we have a build that requires nothing?
No gear.
Nothing. I don't want this.
What makes me sad about it is like, the whole point of this wasn't the fact that Locust Swarm was bad. Locust Swarm was fine before. It was the locusts themselves that are bad, and they are still bad, even
Poor
with like
locusts.
the small buffs they gave them. Like I said, it was the duration of the locusts themselves that I had problems with. It wasn't the duration of Locust Swarm. Locust Swarm was fine. So that's why I was so confused when I saw the buffs. I'm like, that's not what we were talking about. Like when I made a video talking about locusts, I meant locusts, not the Locust Swarm, and it kind of made me sad when I saw that, because now what's going to happen is there's going to be some big nerf, and it's going to involve the locusts themselves. And now, like, because I'm sure EHG will nerf it so that you can't get to 50 locusts like people currently are, and that's how they're going to nerf it. And now that's just going to nerf regular locust builds. It's not going to nerf the Locust Swarm build. If that like, it's going to nerf it, but like not enough to the point where it's dead. But then locusts are going to be terrible because of that.
So in EHG's defense, we saw a nerf for the 085 patch for Bastion of Honor. And like we've been talking for a while, but like the different ways they can nerf Bastion of Honor. The nerf that they did for Bastion was perfect. They just took off the extra layer, reduced damage taken from nearby enemies, or less damage taken from nearby enemies. And like that was a great nerf. It still has the identity of the block effect scaling's OP for nearby enemies. Like it's still an incredibly strong shield. They just took off the dumb extra damage reduction from it. There are plenty of ways that they could nerf this that wouldn't bring collateral damage to like a normal locust minion based build. So I'm a hopeful person. I like.
Yeah, I'm hopeful too. They've been doing really good in that regard. It's just like I said, this whole buff just came from us asking for locusts themselves getting buffed, and then now Locust Swarm got buffed, and it's just confusing.
Well, to be fair, I have been asking explicitly for broken ass builds that are just stupid OP, so that even I can play them. So maybe I'm to blame for this. Like I've really been looking for just builds that require no brain power. Maybe they spent too much time listening to me, and like not enough time listening to you.
Well, I mean, they nerfed Static Orb because they didn't like the playstyle of the BV playstyle where you just run through monoliths like that. I'm curious how they feel about this. It's literally the same thing.
It's a valid point. Valid point.
Wasn't there some talk on the grapevine about hammer throw getting nerfed too?
Yeah, I have heard that in the past. I don't think hammer throw is busted. Like devotion is very strong, but like hammer throw by itself is like, it's fine. It's fun. It's really enjoyable. It's more importantly, hammer throw and like hammer throw proccing smite is an iconic build. It is. It's cool. It's visually impressive. It's distinctive. reminds you of Cast on Crit. It's kind of like a gateway drug into Last Epoch for a Path of Exile player. I think that build should be at least a borderline of, X.
Well, not to get off topic too much, but also to reiterate on the hammer throw thing. I was talking with an EHD dev a long time ago. It was like a few months ago. And they were saying that they want to step away from cock builds, like, cast on hit builds. But then they released something like Dragon Song, and it's like, I don't know. That was a confusing conversation. But like hammer throw isn't like OP, like you can't, like, arena isn't easy with it, like it's not like OP in arena. At least it has some other applications, like like the of course the monolith pushing applications, all that. And I think devotion, all they would have to do is just make it so it's scaled half for like procs of smite and not just full value, so that you would want to self cast with it. And I think that would make it much more, like, not terrible, not enough to like kill the whole build, but also it would make it not as ridiculous as you've seen.
Rewarding people for actually self-casting smite instead of just proccing it any other way. I think that's cool. That's fine. I'm into it.
Yeah. But yeah, the Swarm Strike thing, obviously this is not the playstyle that they want in the game, so it's going to get changed. It's just, how is it going to get changed? And is it going to make it so that the build isn't viable anymore? Is it going to kill the build, or is it going to like leave it to the point where like it can actually still be played? That's a very good question.
We'll see how it turns out. I think that...
Oh wait,
go ahead.
Before you go, we can talk about the Bastion Nerves real quick.
Oh, okay. We talk about the Bastion Nerves. It's a short conversation.
It was a good nerf. All right, good night, everybody.
All right, it was a perfect time. just round of applause for EHE. There are more nerfs that you could do if you wanted to. Like, it's still very clearly an excellent shield. It still kind of bullies other shields out of the way because it is so strong. But, like, maybe there's a build out there that doesn't want to use a Bastion. Maybe you want to use like a normal Iron Glass shield to get like a higher block value against distance enemies. So it's a step in the right direction. It's probably enough. Maybe you could do more. You could do something to change the block effect formula to make it so that you don't have quite so much damage reduction with a Bastion, using just the Bastion and the blessing from Herod. Maybe you could encourage people to build more block effect on their gloves and their 2 ring suffixes as well. Maybe you could buff those values and change the formula. Like, there are other things you could do if you wanted to block, or if you wanted to balance Bastion in that way. However, the change they made in 085, Bastion is still excellent. It's less dumb than it used to be. This was a great change for the game.
I love Bastion now because Bastion represents how it should have been in the first place. Sure, you can like get to 100% block chance on nearby enemies, right? But you also have to build into block effect now. Before, you didn't even have to build into block effect before. Now you need to get the blessing for it to be good. Because, like, let's just be realistic here. Regular Bastion is good outside of Sentinel. Now, if you're a Sentinel and you just have regular Bastion, it is better to just use a shield. But now you can invest into that block effect and make it feel good. And, like, I think that should be the case. Like, I really like the way Bastion is now, where you have to invest into it to make it the best it's going to be. Before, you just slap it on and it's good to go.
Honestly, one of the things that I liked about Bastion really early on is, like, if you don't know about block chance and block effect and how block effect is damage reduction and like how those values scale, like if you never looked up the chart of how those numbers look, when you put on a Bastion for the first time, you're like, oh, this is busted. He's like, wait, block effect. And then you go look it up. It's like this little sneaky way for the developers to say, hey, you can have maximum block chance, but that doesn't mean anything unless you have block effect to go along with it. So it's kind of like this OP item. It's iconic. People know what it is, but it also kind of teaches new players, like, hey, block effect is this thing. Here's why it matters. Go look it up. And that, I love it. I think that's a great place to be.
Yeah, and I like the thing with Bastion, what I like about it as well is, now that it's much harder to get LP on it as well, a very well-geared Paladin or Forge Guard or whatever with a good shield could definitely outscale a Bastion in terms of defenses. Because if you haven't noticed, they have been introducing quickly a lot of ranged enemies that are really dumb. So it's like the way they're balancing Bastion is by and making other shields better than Bastion by just buffing ranged enemies and making them disgusting. Like, there's a lot of them now, so
I've
that
I've
helps too.
I've been learning that in hardcore by just killing all of my characters off to various ranged enemies every time that I put a Bastion on. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm with you on that as well. I like it. So I
And
think
that's how it should be balanced around. Is the game should be balanced around
if this episode 1 is anything to indicate the future of the podcast, I'm gonna have so much fun cutting you off so that we don't go to the 3-hour mark with these conversations. We're gonna try to keep it around an hour. If we end up going for like an hour and a half someday, that'll be fine. But I think for episode 1, this will be where we cut it. Dread, thank you so much for joining me. I'm glad that we can have you as a co-host here on Epic Epoch.
Of course, anytime.
And then for you joining us here in Twitch Chat Live, you should know that we're also going to be putting these up on Spotify once we get those episodes done. These will be going up on YouTube as well. These will be found on Dread's YouTube channel, on Epic Builds, on a separate playlist, so you can all find them in the same place. And I think that's going to be about it for the night. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. And then for all of us here at Epic Epoch, have a good night.